Well, with the recent trip of Trump to China, there's been a lot of discussion about what's going to happen with Taiwan, and is China going to invade Taiwan or take some sort of belligerent action toward Taiwan? And there's a few dimensions of that. First is, you know, for people who don't really know a whole lot about the logistics of an invasion of Taiwan, it's one of probably the most challenging military invasion in history. There's a few reasons for that. One is the distance between China and Taiwan, the sea between them is so rough that you can only attempt a crossing by ship, which would be needed for an invasion, twice a year, once in October and I think once in March, around there. So there are very narrow windows of time when you can organize a fleet, a significant naval fleet to cross over. Now, things are a lot different than they were in World War II when fleets were crossing the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Nowadays, if you have these large, slow-moving ships with hundreds of thousands of sailors on board, you can have drones attacking them nonstop. You could have, submarine drones. You can have aerial drones, and they would be vulnerable for the entire duration of that trip, which would be a severe challenge for any invasion. The second challenge, extremely difficult challenge, is that Taiwan is surrounded on almost all sides by very, very formidable terrain. It's very difficult to land a ship of any size in Taiwan, which gives it a natural defense against invasion. And there are very, very narrow bays that allow large ships to dock anywhere nearby. So you've got a second severe challenge that basically makes invasions like Normandy look like a cakewalk, frankly. So those are two challenges. The third challenge is in order to prepare an invasion during these very narrow windows of time, you obviously are going to need to create supply lines, and you're going to also have to get your ships and your personnel into position. With modern satellite technology, we would know if China was doing that and have lots of time to prepare. So any allies would have time to prepare. Taiwan would have time to prepare for that. All of that. So the invasion itself would be extremely risky, extremely costly, and be very vulnerable to failure from multiple points. And that's what we've seen. Like, we've seen now in 4 years, two major countries, Russia and the US, run up against a brick wall when invading a smaller country. In the case of Russia, it's Ukraine. In the case of US, it's Iran. And the potential for asymmetric warfare, particularly drone warfare, to turn the tables on a conventional army. So all those things. The other element of this is that Taiwan obviously manufactures a vast majority of semiconductors in the world. So if China decides to invade Taiwan, both by nature of an invasion itself and by Taiwanese policy, it would probably be very difficult to be getting semiconductors during that time. And of course, that would have a massive effect on China's economy, on its military. If they can't get semiconductors, a huge percentage of their manufacturing goes offline. And it would throw China, which is already in a severe economic, it's vulnerable economically. The real estate crash in China, and the economy slowing down, it would put it in far more economic stress. Not something that Xi wants at this point in time. Knowing that there's already some domestic, upset at the state of the economy. And then I guess the other thing is, as we've seen from Iran and Ukraine and Greenland and a variety of countries, Canada, you name it, is that once a belligerent larger nation starts to threaten a smaller nation, public opinion really, really quickly kind of snaps to, and there's a kind of rally around the flag effect. So, the Taiwanese people, which in opinion polls have been, kind of gradually opening up at least the idea of talking to China, which is something that wasn't as true as much as 4 or 5 years ago. All that progress that China feels it's made on influencing public opinion would go out the window because people just tend to rally behind their own country when it's being attacked. So all that progress would be gone. I think for all those reasons, the likelihood of China directly invading Taiwan expands the risk. Of course, the almost certainty of international sanctions, with the exception maybe of the United States, which seems to be basically led around the nose by China these days. But still, other countries, Europe, Canada, many other countries would probably almost certainly sanction China, which would have a severe impact on its economy as well. For all these reasons, it's not such a foregone conclusion as is often talked about that China would do such a thing. More likely that they would, rattle their sabers, with flagrant incursions onto Taiwanese, airspace or marine space in order to kind of assert dominance over Taiwan. But at the same time, China has to be careful, right? If they keep rattling their sabers, if they keep threatening Taiwan, they run the risk of turning the young people of Taiwan, who are kind of somewhat more open to a one China policy, turning those people against China. So it's a tricky dance that they're doing. It's not impossible, of course, that China would invade Taiwan. Every prediction is very vulnerable to being wrong. But if they were to, it would probably be around those windows of time, maybe in October, which would be a month before the U.S. midterms, when China has to see that it has a fairly narrow window of time to do something like an invasion, when they've got Trump at the wheel, who is already kind of shot his shot with Iran, is very low on munitions, and seems to be easy to manipulate against Taiwan. So if they're going to do it, it's probably going to be this year. But I would say the likelihood of it is a lot lower than people think.